My husband of 43 years had been missing for 2 weeks, and here in my trembling fingers was a last will and testament, dated just 3 months ago, leaving everything, our house, our savings, his pension, everything we'd built together, to a woman named Gabrielle Montgomery. Not to me. Not to our children. To a stranger. The paper fell from my hands and drifted to the floor like a feather, landing beside the overturned drawer I'd been searching through, looking for anything that might tell me where Raymond had gone. Instead, I'd found this. I pressed my palm against the desk to steady myself, my wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. The same ring Raymond had placed on my finger in 1982 at Sweet Bethel Baptist Church. With both our families gathered around us and Reverend Thompson blessing our union. "Lord Jesus," I whispered into the empty room, "what have you done, Raymond?" Before we continue, shout out to Deshawn from Atlanta. We appreciate the love you show by commenting and sharing. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really started, because you need to understand something. Raymond Washington was the most predictable man who ever lived. For 43 years, that man followed the same routine like clockwork. Up at 6 every morning, coffee with 2 sugars, kissed me on the forehead before leaving for his job at the Postal Service. Even after he retired 5 years ago, he kept that same schedule, except instead of going to work, he'd meet his buddy Leonard at the diner for breakfast, then spend his mornings working on old cars in our garage. But 3 Wednesdays ago, everything changed. I was at my quilting circle at church. We meet every Wednesday afternoon, have been for 20 years now. My friend Patricia was showing us pictures of her new grandbaby when my phone rang. It was our daughter, Tanya. "Mama, is Daddy with you?" she asked, her voice tight with that edge she gets when something's wrong. "No, baby, I'm at church." "Why? What's going on?" "I stopped by the house to drop off those collard greens you wanted, and his car's in the driveway, but he's not answering the door. I used my key and went in, but he's not here. There's a coffee cup on the table, still half full. It's like he just vanished." My heart started racing then, though I tried to keep my voice calm for the other ladies. "Maybe he went for a walk. You know your daddy, always restless." "Mama, his wallet's on the counter. His phone too. Who goes for a walk without their phone?" That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. I excused myself from the quilting circle, and Patricia drove me home faster than I'd ever seen her navigate Atlanta traffic. When we got there, Tanya was sitting on our front porch steps, her face creased with worry. She's 38 now, my oldest, and she still looks just like she did at 8 years old when she's scared. We searched the house together. Nothing seemed out of place except Raymond himself. His medications were in the bathroom cabinet. He had high blood pressure and was supposed to take those pills every day. His favorite jacket was still hanging by the door. Even his reading glasses were on the nightstand, next to the mystery novel he'd been working through. "Did you and Daddy have a fight?" Tanya asked carefully. "No, baby. Everything was fine this morning, normal as always." And it was true. Raymond had kissed my forehead just like he'd done for 43 years, told me he loved me, and walked out to the garage. I'd heard him tinkering with that old Chevy he was restoring. Then I'd left for church around noon. That was the last time I saw my husband. We called the police, but they weren't much help. "Ma'am, your husband is a grown man," the officer told me, barely looking up from his notepad. "He has the right to go where he pleases. Unless there's evidence of foul play, there's not much we can do. Most missing person cases like this, the person comes back on their own within 72 hours. But 72 hours passed. Then a week, then 2 weeks. Our son Brandon drove down from Charlotte to help search. He filed a missing person report, put Raymond's picture on Facebook, called all the hospitals in a 50-mile radius. Nothing. Raymond had simply vanished like smoke in the wind. The neighborhood started talking, of course. In our community, everyone knows everyone else's business. Mrs. Coleman from next door brought over a casserole and asked in her not-so-subtle way if Raymond and I had been having troubles. Ms. Jean from across the street mentioned she'd seen a fancy car parked in front of our house a few times in the past months, though she couldn't describe it beyond expensive looking. I held myself together during the day, playing the strong matriarch everyone expected me to be. But at night, lying in our bed alone, I'd cry into Raymond's pillow, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne, and wonder if he was hurt somewhere, if he needed me, if he was ever coming back. The church family rallied around me. Reverend Jackson included Raymond in the prayer list every Sunday. The ladies from my quilting circle took turns bringing me meals. Patricia would sit with me in the evenings, just keeping me company, not saying much because what was there to say? My husband had disappeared without a trace. On the 14th day, that's today, the day I found the will, I woke up feeling different. Not hopeful exactly, but determined. I'd been going through the motions, waiting for Raymond to come back or for someone to give me answers. But I realized I needed to find those answers myself. After breakfast, I went into Raymond's office, a small room off the garage where he kept his files and paperwork. We'd always kept our finances separate but honest. I handled the household bills, he managed his pension and savings. We were partners, or so I'd thought. I'd never had reason to go digging through his private papers before. The room smelled like him, Old Spice and motor oil. His desk was neat as always, everything in its place. I started with the filing cabinet, working through folders labeled insurance, taxes, car titles. Nothing unusual. Then I moved to his desk drawers. The top drawer held the usual office supplies. The second drawer was full of receipts and old mail, but the bottom drawer was locked. I stared at that lock for a long moment. In 43 years of marriage, Raymond had never locked anything from me. We didn't have secrets. At least, I thought we didn't. I found the key in his desk organizer, tucked behind a cup of pens. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock and turned. The drawer opened with a soft click that sounded loud as a gunshot in the quiet room. Inside were folders, but these weren't labeled with mundane categories. These had women's names written on them in Raymond's careful handwriting. The top folder was labeled Gabrielle. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I pulled out that folder and opened it. Bank statements fell out. Account statements showing regular transfers of $500 every month for the past 3 years. Receipts for jewelry, for dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, for a hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. And then, clipped to the inside of the folder, the will. That's when time seemed to stop, when the room started spinning and I had to sit down hard in Raymond's desk chair. When I realized my husband, my Raymond, my partner, the man who'd held my hand through 2 childbirths and 3 grandchildren, who'd nursed me through pneumonia and celebrated every anniversary like it was our first, had been living a double life. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at those papers. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. The afternoon sun moved across the floor, painting shadows that grew longer and darker. Finally, I forced myself to keep looking, to read through everything in that folder. There were hotel receipts going back 5 years, restaurant bills, flowers, so many flowers, a lease agreement for an apartment across town on Peachtree Street. Bank statements showing Raymond had opened a separate account I knew nothing about, one he'd been funneling money into for years. Our money. Money from his pension, from the savings we were supposed to be using for our retirement, for emergencies, for our grandchildren's college funds. And underneath it all, a photograph. Raymond stood in front of that apartment building on Peachtree Street, his arm around a woman who looked to be in her early 40s. She was beautiful, smooth dark skin, natural hair styled in an elegant updo, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my entire Sunday wardrobe. But what killed me wasn't her beauty. It was the way Raymond was looking at her, the same way he used to look at me, back when we were young and everything was new and full of possibility. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in Raymond's handwriting, Gabrielle and me, our anniversary, 3 years of happiness. 3 years of happiness. While I'd been home thinking we were happy together, thinking we were growing old together, sharing our golden years together, Raymond had been building a whole other life, a whole other anniversary to celebrate, a whole other woman to love. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. I wanted to drive to that apartment building and pound on every door until I found this Gabrielle Montgomery and demanded answers. But I'm 68 years old and we don't act a fool, no matter how much we're hurting. My mama raised me better than that. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew could help me think clearly. Patricia answered on the second ring. Dolores, you okay? Pat, I need you to come over, right now. And bring your niece, the one who's a lawyer. Kenya, what's going on? I found something. Something bad. I can't. My voice cracked. Just please come. I need help. Patricia must have heard something in my voice because she didn't ask any more questions. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and looked around Raymond's office with new eyes. How many other secrets were hiding in here? How many other lies? I started pulling out the other folders from that locked drawer. There were 4 more, each with a woman's name. Sharon, Denise, Michelle, Brenda. My stomach turned. How many women had there been? How long had this been going on? But as I opened the first folder, Sharon, I realized something didn't quite add up. These weren't love letters or hotel receipts. These were legal documents. Power of attorney forms, bank account authorizations, property deeds. And they all had one thing in common. They were made out in Raymond's name, but the properties and accounts had originally belonged to these women. Sharon Davis, 72 years old, widow. Denise Freeman, 68 years old, widow. Michelle Porter, 75 years old, widow. A cold dread washed over me as I started to understand what I was looking at. Raymond hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been running a con, targeting older women, lonely widows, gaining their trust, and somehow getting access to their money and property. The dates on the documents told the story. He'd moved from one woman to the next over the years, each relationship lasting about 3 to 4 years before moving on to someone new. And Gabrielle Montgomery was just the latest victim. Or was she? I heard Patricia's car pull into the driveway, 2 car doors slamming. I gathered up all the papers, shoving them back into the folders with shaking hands. Whatever Raymond had been doing, whatever he'd become, I needed help figuring it out. I needed answers. But as I stood up to go meet Patricia at the door, I saw one more document in the bottom of the drawer. A certified letter, still sealed, with the return address showing it was from the Georgia Department of Law, Criminal Investigations Division. It was addressed to Raymond and dated just 4 days before he disappeared. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single page, official letterhead, formal language that made my blood run cold. Mr. Washington, this letter is to inform you that you are under investigation for multiple counts of elder fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. You are required to appear for questioning on March 28th. Failure to appear will result in a warrant being issued for your arrest. March 28th. That was the day after Raymond disappeared. The doorbell rang, Patricia calling my name through the front door. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, holding that letter, as the truth crashed over me like a wave. Raymond wasn't missing because something had happened to him. He'd run. He'd known the police were coming for him, and he'd run like a coward, leaving me to deal with the aftermath of whatever criminal empire he'd been building behind my back. And according to that will, he'd left everything to Gabrielle Montgomery, the woman I'd thought was just another victim. But what if she wasn't a victim at all? What if she was his partner? Patricia found me still standing in Raymond's office, clutching that letter from the Criminal Investigations Division. She took one look at my face and wrapped her arms around me, and that's when I finally broke. I sobbed into her shoulder like a child, 43 years of trust and love crumbling to dust in my hands. "Let it out, Dee," she whispered, rubbing my back. "Let it all out." Her niece Kenya stood in the doorway, a tall young woman in a sharp pantsuit with her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun. She was 32, a criminal defense attorney with her own practice downtown, and she had the kind of intelligent eyes that didn't miss much. Right now, those eyes were scanning Raymond's office, taking in the scattered papers, the open drawer, my tear-stained face. "Mrs. Washington," she said gently, "why don't we sit down and you can tell me what's going on?" We moved to the kitchen table, and I laid out everything. The folders, the bank statements, the will, the photograph, the investigation letter. Kenya took notes on her legal pad, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. Patricia held my hand, squeezing it every time my voice started to shake. When I finished, Kenya sat back and let out a long breath. "Mrs. Washington, I'm going to be straight with you. This is bad. Really bad. Your husband was running what we call a romance scam targeting vulnerable older women. The fact that there's a criminal investigation means at least one of his victims reported him to the authorities." "But the will," I said, my voice hoarse from crying. "Why would he leave everything to Gabrielle if she's just another victim? That doesn't make sense." Kenya tapped her pen against her pad, thinking. "You're right. It doesn't. Either she's his primary victim and he was trying to secure her loyalty, or," she paused, meeting my eyes, "or she's not a victim at all. She could be his accomplice. If he knew he was about to be arrested, making her the beneficiary could be a way to hide assets from law enforcement. They can't seize property that legally belongs to someone who hasn't been charged with a crime." The room spun. So everything we built together, everything we saved, he was going to give it to his criminal partner. Potentially. But here's the thing. That will isn't valid yet because Raymond isn't dead. He's just missing. And even if something has happened to him, we can contest that will on multiple grounds. Fraud, undue influence, lack of mental capacity. We have options. Patricia leaned forward. "First things first. We need to find out who this Gabrielle woman really is." Kenya nodded. "I can run a background check, and we should contact the investigator handling Raymond's case. They might have information we don't." She looked at me carefully. "Mrs. Washington, I have to ask, are you prepared for what we might find? Because once we start pulling this thread, there's no telling what's going to unravel." I thought about my grandchildren, Tanya's twins, Isaiah and Naomi, just 7 years old, and Brandon's daughter, Sierra, who was 5. I thought about the college funds Raymond and I had promised them. I thought about the house we'd paid off together, the retirement we'd planned, the legacy we were supposed to leave. "I need to know the truth," I said firmly. "Whatever it is, those babies deserve to inherit something more than shame and debt." Kenya smiled. "That's what I wanted to hear." "Okay, let's get to work." Over the next 3 days, Kenya worked her magic. The background check on Gabrielle Montgomery came back with some interesting information. She was 43 years old, never married, no children. She worked as a financial consultant, but had no formal licenses or credentials that Kenya could find. Her apartment, the one Raymond had been paying for, was in a luxury building where rent started at $3,000 a month. But here's what really caught our attention. Gabrielle had been married before, briefly, to a man named Vernon Hughes. Vernon had died 5 years ago under questionable circumstances, a fall down the stairs in their home. The investigation ruled it an accident, but there had been some suspicion. Vernon's children from his first marriage had tried to contest his will, which left everything to Gabrielle, but they'd lost. Gabrielle had walked away with nearly $2 million. $2 million, I repeated, staring at the report Kenya had printed out. We were sitting in my living room, me, Patricia, Kenya, and now Tanya and Brandon too. I'd had to tell my children everything, and watching their faces as they learned what their father had done was almost worse than discovering it myself. That low-down... Brandon couldn't even finish the sentence. He stood up and paced to the window, his jaw clenched tight. He looked so much like Raymond in that moment that it made my heart ache. Tanya was quieter, but I could see the anger in her eyes. So this woman already had money. Why would Daddy be giving her more? Why target someone who doesn't need it? Kenya looked up from her laptop. Because it's not about need. It's about greed. And here's something else. I found a connection between Gabrielle and one of the other women in Raymond's files. Michelle Porter, the 75-year-old widow. She lived in the same apartment building as Gabrielle's late husband, Vernon. In fact, according to building records, Gabrielle visited that building regularly for months before Vernon died. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that made me sick to my stomach. "You think Gabrielle recruited my father?" Tanya asked. "Used him to target vulnerable women?" "It's possible," Kenya said. "Raymond would have been perfect for it. Respectable retired postal worker, friendly, trustworthy. Gabrielle provides the targets and handles the money. Raymond provides the charm and the con. They split the profits." "But then why would he leave everything to her?" I asked. "If they were partners, wouldn't he want to keep his share?" Kenya leaned back, thinking. Maybe he was trying to buy her silence. Or maybe... She pulled up something on her laptop. "Mrs. Washington, when did Raymond first start acting strange? Not the disappearance, but before that. Any changes in behavior?" I thought back. About 6 months ago, maybe a little more. He seemed stressed, wasn't sleeping well. I thought it was just age, you know. But now that I think about it, he started spending more time in his office, making phone calls with the door closed. Getting jumpy when I walked in, unexpected. That timing matches up with when the investigation likely started. One of the victims probably reported him, and he knew the walls were closing in. Kenya turned her laptop to show me a news article. "Look at this. Sharon Davis, one of the women in his files, died 3 months ago. Her daughter filed a police report claiming her mother had been defrauded of over $300,000 before her death. That's probably what triggered the investigation." Brandon stopped pacing. So Dad knew he was going to get caught. He made the will, leaving everything to Gabrielle, and then he disappeared before he could be arrested. "That's my theory," Kenya said. "But here's what bothers me. Where is he now? And why hasn't Gabrielle reported him missing? You'd think if they were in a relationship, even a fraudulent one, she'd be concerned. Unless she knows exactly where he is," Patricia finished quietly. The room fell silent. We all looked at each other, the same terrible thought forming in all our minds at once. "We need to find Gabrielle," I said. "We need to talk to her, now." Kenya shook her head. "Let me contact the investigator first. If Raymond's on the run, they need to know. And if Gabrielle's involved, we don't want to tip her off before law enforcement can act." But I was tired of waiting. Tired of being the patient, proper widow everybody expected me to be while my world fell apart. I stood up, smoothing down my church dress. "Kenya, I appreciate everything you're doing, but I'm going to that apartment, today. I need to look that woman in the eye." "Mama, that's not safe," Tanya protested. "Your mother's right," Patricia said, standing up beside me. "Sometimes you need to face the devil head on. And she won't be alone. I'm going with her." "We all are," Brandon said firmly. "This woman doesn't get to destroy our family and hide in her fancy apartment." Kenya sighed, but I could see a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Fine, but we do this smart. I'm coming too, and we record everything. Georgia's a one-party consent state, so anything she says can be used later. And at the first sign of trouble, we leave and call the police. Agreed?" We all nodded. An hour later, we were standing in the lobby of a gleaming high-rise on Peachtree Street. The doorman, a young brother in a crisp uniform, looked at our group with barely concealed suspicion. 5 black folks, ranging from me in my church clothes to Kenya in her power suit, probably didn't match his usual clientele. "We're here to see Gabrielle Montgomery," Kenya said, her voice professional and firm. "Apartment 1204. "Is she expecting you?" the doorman asked. "It's a surprise," Patricia said sweetly. "Family matter." He looked uncertain, reaching for the phone, but before he could dial, the elevator dinged and a woman stepped out. I recognized her instantly from the photograph. Gabrielle Montgomery, even more striking in person. She wore designer jeans and a silk blouse, her natural hair styled in perfect curls. She froze when she saw us, her eyes going wide, and in that moment I knew. She knew exactly who I was. "Mrs. Washington," she said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite place. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. "You know my name," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Funny, since my husband never mentioned you, not once in 43 years. People in the lobby were starting to stare. Gabrielle glanced around, then back at us. "Perhaps we should talk in private." "Your apartment?" Kenya suggested pointedly. Gabrielle hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Follow me." The elevator ride up to the 12th floor was silent and tense. Gabrielle kept glancing at me, then away, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Brandon stood behind her, his arms crossed, looking like he was barely restraining himself from saying what was on his mind. Apartment 1204 was exactly what I'd expected. Modern, expensive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Everything in it screamed money. Our money, I thought bitterly. Money Raymond had stolen and given to this woman. "Please. Sit," Gabrielle said, gesturing to a white leather couch that probably cost more than my car. "We'll stand," I said. "This won't take long." "Where is my husband?" Gabrielle's face crumpled. "I don't know." "Liar," Brandon spat. "I'm not lying." Gabrielle's voice rose. "I haven't seen Raymond in 3 weeks. He called me the day before he disappeared, said he had to take care of something, and that was it. He won't answer my calls, won't respond to my texts. I've been losing my mind." Kenya pulled out her phone, the recording app already running. "Ms. Montgomery, how long have you known Raymond Washington?" 3 years. We met at—" She stopped, seeming to realize this was an interrogation. "At what?" Kenya pressed. Gabrielle sank down onto her couch, her head in her hands. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "At a grief support group. My husband had just died and I was in a dark place. Raymond was so kind, so understanding. He said his wife—" She looked at me. "He said you had passed away 2 years earlier. Cancer. He showed me pictures of the funeral, everything." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "He said he was lonely, that his children didn't understand his grief, that he'd joined the support group to find people who understood loss." The tears were streaming down Gabrielle's face now. "I fell in love with him. He said he loved me too. We talked about getting married, about starting fresh together." Tanya made a sound of disgust. "While he was still married to my mother? While he was coming home to her every night? I didn't know." Gabrielle stood up, her voice desperate. "I swear I didn't know he was married. I thought—" She pulled out her phone, scrolling frantically. Look at this." She showed us a photo on her screen. It was Raymond's death certificate, or what looked like one anyway. Raymond Elijah Washington, deceased January 15th, 2023, cause of death, heart attack. "It's fake," Kenya said immediately. "A good fake, but fake. See the registration number? That's not the correct format for Georgia death certificates." Gabrielle stared at the phone like she was seeing it for the first time. Oh my God, he lied about everything." She looked at me, her face pale. "You're really alive. You're really his wife. This whole time my husband was living 2 lives," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "And you were part of it, whether you knew it or not. That will he made. Leaving everything to you. What will?" Gabrielle's head snapped up. What are you talking about? Kenya and I exchanged glances. Either Gabrielle was an incredible actress, or she genuinely didn't know about the will. Raymond made a new will 3 months ago, Kenya explained, leaving his entire estate to you, his house, his savings, his pension, everything. Gabrielle's face went white. She sat back down hard. No, he wouldn't. He told me his children were inheriting everything. He said he was just giving me this apartment, that it was all he could spare. She looked up at us, confusion and horror warring on her face. Why would he leave me everything? Unless what? Brandon demanded. Unless he knew he wasn't coming back, Gabrielle whispered. Unless he knew something was going to happen to him. The doorbell rang, making us all jump. Gabrielle wasn't expecting anyone. I could tell by her face. She walked to the door slowly, checked the peephole, and went even paler. It's the police, she said, her voice barely audible. Kenya moved fast, stepping to the door. Don't open it yet. Gabrielle, is there any reason the police would be looking for you? No, I haven't done anything. But there was something in her eyes, something that said she wasn't telling us everything. The knock came again, harder this time. Ms. Montgomery, this is Detective Morris with Atlanta PD. We need to speak with you about Raymond Washington. Gabrielle's hands were shaking as she opened the door. 2 detectives stood there, a black woman in her 50s and a white man in his 40s. They looked surprised to see all of us. Ms. Montgomery? The female detective said. I'm Detective Morris, this is Detective Chen. We need to ask you some questions about... She stopped, her eyes landing on me. Mrs. Washington? You know who I am? I asked. We've been trying to reach you. Ma'am, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Detective Morris stepped into the apartment, her expression grave. We found your husband. My heart stopped. The room tilted. I heard Tanya gasp, felt Patricia grab my arm to steady me. Where is he? I managed to ask. Is he alive? Detective Morris glanced at her partner, then back at me. Mrs. Washington, perhaps you should sit down. Just tell me. My voice broke. Please, just tell me. We found Raymond Washington's body this morning in a storage unit in College Park. Ma'am, I'm very sorry, but your husband is dead. And based on the evidence at the scene, we're treating this as a homicide. The room erupted. Tanya screamed. Brandon started swearing. Patricia pulled me close as my knees gave out. But through the chaos, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Gabrielle wasn't surprised. She was crying, yes. She looked shocked, yes. But underneath it all, in that split second before she controlled her expression, I saw something else. Relief. Detective Morris was still talking, saying something about an investigation, about questions, about forensics. But I couldn't focus on her words. All I could see was Gabrielle's face, and all I could think was, she knew. She knew Raymond was dead. Maybe she even knew where he was. And if that was true, then maybe, just maybe, she was the one who put him there. Detective Morris wanted to question all of us separately, starting with me. They set up at my house, using my own dining room table like it was an interrogation room. Brandon wanted to stay with me, but the detectives insisted, one witness at a time. Kenya sat beside me as my attorney, her legal pad ready, her face set in professional determination. Mrs. Washington, Detective Morris said, her voice gentle but firm. When was the last time you saw your husband alive? I told her everything. The morning he disappeared, the search, finding the will, the other women, the criminal investigation. I showed them the folders, the bank statements, the photograph. Detective Morris and her partner, Detective Chen, took notes, exchanged meaningful glances, and asked follow-up questions that made it clear they'd already known some of this. The storage unit where we found your husband, Detective Chen said. Was rented under the name Vernon Hughes. Does that name mean anything to you? That was Gabrielle Montgomery's late husband, Kenya answered. He died 5 years ago. Died or was killed? Detective Morris asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. The official ruling was accidental death, Kenya said. But there were questions. Detective Morris nodded slowly. We're reopening that case. Mrs. Washington, I need to ask you directly. Did you kill your husband? The question should have shocked me, but it didn't. I was a wife who'd just discovered her husband's betrayal. Of course, I was a suspect. No, I said firmly, looking her straight in the eye. I loved my husband for 43 years. Even after everything I learned, even after all his lies, I wanted answers, not revenge. I wanted him to come home and explain. To tell me why. Can anyone verify your whereabouts over the past 3 weeks? Patricia Coleman has been with me almost every day since Raymond disappeared. The church, my quilting circle, my neighbors. Dozens of people can tell you I've been here, grieving and searching. Detective Morris made notes, then looked up. What about your children? My heart clenched. My children loved their father. They're devastated. Neither of them would. We have to ask everyone, Mrs. Washington. It's procedure. She closed her notebook. We'll need to speak with them as well. And Ms. Montgomery. The fact that she showed relief at the news of your husband's death is concerning. After they finished with me, they questioned Tanya, then Brandon, then Patricia. Kenya stayed through all of it, making sure they didn't overstep. By the time they left, it was past midnight, and we were all exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally drained. They think one of us did it, Tanya said, her voice hollow. She sat on my couch, still in shock, her eyes red from crying. They think our family killed Daddy. They're just doing their job, baby, I said, though the words felt empty. The truth will come out. But what was the truth? Over the next few days, as we buried Raymond in a quiet ceremony with just family present, no obituary, no announcement, because what would we even say? I kept replaying that moment in Gabrielle's apartment, that flash of relief on her face. The funeral was hard. Reverend Jackson gave a brief, careful eulogy that didn't mention how Raymond died, focusing instead on his years of service to the community, his children, his grandchildren. I sat in the front pew of Sweet Bethel Baptist Church, the same church where we'd gotten married, and wondered if I'd ever really known the man I was burying. After the service, as people filed past offering condolences they didn't quite mean, everyone knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know the details. A woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was older, maybe 75, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Washington, she said quietly. My name is Dorothy Porter. I wonder if I might speak with you privately. The name Porter rang a bell. Michelle Porter, one of the women in Raymond's files. Are you related to Michelle Porter? I asked. She was my sister. She passed away 2 years ago. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. I've been trying to piece together what happened to her before she died. She lost everything, her house, her savings, even her medication money. I thought it was dementia, that she'd made bad decisions. But then I saw your husband's name in the news this morning. The news? Of course. Retired postal worker found dead in suspicious circumstances. Police investigating wife. The headlines had been brutal, the speculation worse. The comments online had called me everything from a cold-blooded killer to a scorned woman who'd finally snapped. My sister talked about a man named Raymond in her last months, Dorothy continued. Said he was going to help her invest her money, that they were going to travel together. She gave him power of attorney because he said it would make things easier. 3 months later, she was broke and he was gone. It destroyed her. She died of a broken heart, Mrs. Washington. That's what really killed her. I felt sick. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I swear I didn't know what he was doing. Dorothy squeezed my hand. I believe you. But there's something else you should know. About 2 weeks before your husband disappeared, my sister's lawyer contacted me, said they'd been investigating Michelle's case and found something strange. The money didn't just disappear. It was transferred in a specific pattern that suggested professional knowledge, like someone who understood how to hide financial crimes. What are you saying? I'm saying your husband might have had help, professional help, and I think I know who. Dorothy pulled out a business card. This is the lawyer who is helping me, Lionel Bradford. He's been tracking similar cases across 3 states. He'd like to speak with you. I took the card with shaking hands. Kenya had been standing nearby, listening. She leaned in. Mrs. Washington, I think we need to call this lawyer. Now. We met Lionel Bradford the next morning at Kenya's office. He was a distinguished-looking brother in his 60s, with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades fighting in courtrooms. He laid out folders on Kenya's conference table, not 3 or 4 folders, but dozens. I've been investigating a pattern of elder fraud for the past 5 years, he explained. It started when a client came to me claiming her mother had been swindled out of her life savings by a trusted friend. As I dug deeper, I found more cases. Same pattern. Older widows, trusted male companion, power of attorney, and then... He snapped his fingers. Everything gone. How many victims? I asked, afraid of the answer. That I can prove? 14. But I suspect there are more who never came forward out of shame or who died before they could report it. He opened a folder and pulled out photographs. I recognized some of the names from Raymond's files, but there were others I'd never seen. Your husband was one of several men involved in this scheme, Lionel continued. But he wasn't the mastermind. The real architect is someone with financial expertise, legal knowledge, and a complete absence of conscience. He pulled out another photograph. It was Gabrielle Montgomery, but she wasn't alone. She was standing with 2 other women and a man, all dressed professionally, at what looked like a conference or seminar. Gabrielle Montgomery, formerly Gabrielle Thompson, has been running variations of this con for at least a decade. She recruits men, usually lonely, morally flexible, in need of money, and uses them to target vulnerable women. The men do the romantic work, gain trust, get power of attorney. Gabrielle handles the financial side, moving money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Then the relationship ends, the money's gone, and the men move on to the next target. But Raymond left everything to her in his will, Kenya said. Why would he do that if she was using him? Because your husband was trying to flip on her, Lionel said. We know because he contacted my office 6 weeks ago, said he wanted to make a deal, his testimony against Gabrielle in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was scared. Said Gabrielle had killed before, and he thought he might be next. The room went silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Vernon Hughes, I whispered. Gabrielle's first husband. Lionel nodded. We believe Vernon discovered what Gabrielle was doing and threatened to turn her in. 2 days later, he fell down the stairs. The investigation ruled it an accident, but Vernon's children always suspected foul play. They just couldn't prove it. And you think Gabrielle killed my father too? Brandon's voice was tight with rage. I think when Raymond tried to back out, when he agreed to testify against her, Gabrielle saw him as a liability. The will leaving everything to her. I think he made that under duress. It was his way of buying time, making her think he was still on her side. But he was planning to run, to disappear until the trial. He just didn't run fast enough. We need to take this to the police, Kenya said immediately. Already done, Lionel replied. I've been working with Detective Morris for the past 3 days. They've been building a case against Gabrielle, but they needed confirmation. That's why I came to you, Mrs. Washington. We need your help to finish this. What do you need me to do? I asked. And I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. How strong. Because I'd spent weeks feeling like a victim, of Raymond's betrayal, of the media's speculation, of circumstances beyond my control. But I wasn't a victim. I was a woman who'd built a life, raised children, survived 43 years of marriage to a man who turned out to be a stranger. And I wasn't going to let some manipulative criminal destroy my family's future. "We need you to contest the will," Lionel said, "publicly and aggressively. Make Gabrielle think you're coming after her money. She's arrogant. She thinks she's smarter than everyone else. If she believes you're a threat to her inheritance, she might make a mistake." "You want to use my mother as bait," Brandon said flatly. "I want to get justice for the 14 women who were robbed, including your mother," Lionel corrected. "And I want to make sure Gabrielle Montgomery pays for what she's done. But yes, there's an element of risk." I looked at Kenya, then at my children, then at Patricia, who'd been silent through all of this. She met my eyes and nodded slowly. These were my people, my family, my community. They had my back. "Let's do it," I said. The will contest made headlines. "Widow fights mistress for dead husband's estate." The media ate it up. I gave one carefully prepared interview where I played the grieving wife, shocked by her husband's betrayal, fighting to protect her grandchildren's inheritance. It was all true, but it was also bait. Kenya filed the contest in probate court, claiming the will was made under duress, that Raymond lacked mental capacity, that Gabrielle had exercised undue influence. We requested a full audit of Raymond's finances and demanded Gabrielle provide documentation of her relationship with my husband. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Detective Morris and her team were working behind the scenes, building their case. They'd gotten a warrant for Gabrielle's financial records and found the trail of stolen money flowing through her account. They'd interviewed other victims, other men who'd worked with her. The case was coming together, but Gabrielle was smart. She hired expensive lawyers, prepared her defense, played the grieving girlfriend who'd been deceived just like I had. Her attorneys painted Raymond as a con man who'd manipulated both of us, claimed Gabrielle was a victim who'd been left everything because Raymond felt guilty. The day of the hearing, Sweet Bethel Baptist Church was behind me. Reverend Jackson came, along with half the congregation. My quilting circle sat in the back rows. Patricia held one of my hands, Tanya the other. Brandon sat behind me with his wife, little Sierra, in his lap. The community had rallied, bringing casseroles and prayers and their presence, showing Gabrielle and her fancy lawyers that I wasn't alone. The courtroom was packed. Gabrielle sat at the defendant's table in a tasteful black dress, looking elegant and composed. When our eyes met, she gave me a small, cold smile that said she thought she'd already won. The hearing began. Kenya presented our case methodically, the pattern of fraud, the other victims, the suspicious timing of the will. Gabrielle's lawyers countered with their version. Raymond was a con artist. Gabrielle was simply his last victim. The will was legitimate and made of Raymond's free will. It went back and forth for hours. Testimony from handwriting experts about the will, financial experts about the missing money, character witnesses on both sides. I watched it all, feeling strangely disconnected, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Then Lionel Bradford took the stand as an expert witness. He walked the judge through the entire scheme, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the pattern of targeting elderly widows. He presented evidence connecting Gabrielle to all of it. "And do you have proof that Ms. Montgomery was directly involved in these crimes?" the judge asked. "I do, Your Honor." Lionel pulled out a document. "This is a signed affidavit from Vernon Hughes, Ms. Montgomery's late husband, written 2 days before his death. In it, he describes his wife's criminal activities and expresses fear for his safety. He left this document with his attorney with instructions to open it only if something happened to him. The attorney only recently came forward after learning of Raymond Washington's death." The courtroom erupted. Gabrielle's face went white. Her lawyers were on their feet, objecting, but the judge waved them down. "The affidavit also includes a flash drive with financial records Vernon secretly copied," Lionel continued. Records showing Ms. Montgomery's involvement in multiple instances of elder fraud going back 15 years, including transfers of money from Raymond Washington's victims directly into accounts controlled by Ms. Montgomery. I watched Gabrielle's mask crack. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. The judge called a recess. 20 minutes later, Detective Morris entered the courtroom with 2 uniformed officers. They walked straight to Gabrielle. "Gabrielle Montgomery, you're under arrest for the murders of Vernon Hughes and Raymond Washington, and for multiple counts of elder fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." Detective Morris's voice rang clear through the courtroom. "You have the right to remain silent." Gabrielle struggled as they cuffed her. "This is insane. I didn't kill anyone. Raymond died because he was stupid, because he thought he could betray me and—" She stopped, realizing what she'd just said. "Because he thought he could betray you and what?" Detective Morris asked calmly. "And live? Ms. Montgomery, you just confessed." They let her out in handcuffs as the courtroom watched. The cameras caught every moment. I sat there feeling waves of emotion crash over me. Relief, grief, vindication, exhaustion. The judge made his ruling immediately. Given the criminal charges and the evidence of fraud, I'm invalidating the will in question. The estate of Raymond Washington will be distributed according to Georgia intestacy law, with his lawful wife, Dolores Washington, as the primary beneficiary. Court is adjourned. Kenya hugged me. Patricia hugged me. My children hugged me. The church folks surrounded me with their love and support, and I let myself cry. Not tears of grief anymore, but something else. Release, maybe. Or the beginning of healing. The trial happened 6 months later. I attended every day, sitting in that courtroom, listening to the evidence against Gabrielle. They found Raymond's DNA in that storage unit, along with evidence that he'd been held there before he died. They found text messages on Gabrielle's phone coordinating with 2 men she'd hired to take care of a problem. They found everything. Gabrielle was convicted on all counts. 2 life sentences plus 40 years for the fraud charges. She'd spend the rest of her life in prison. The other men involved in her scheme, there were 4 of them besides Raymond, took plea deals in exchange for testimony against her. The money was harder to recover. Some had been spent, some was hidden in accounts we'd never find. But Lionel Bradford and Kenya worked magic. They tracked down over $1 million and helped distribute it to the victims' families. As for me, the house was mine again, free and clear. The savings that hadn't been stolen, about half of what we'd had, was mine. Raymond's pension continued. I wouldn't be rich, but I'd be comfortable. More importantly, I could set up college funds for Isaiah, Naomi, and Sierra like I'd promised. But the real treasure was something I hadn't expected. Dorothy Porter and I became friends, bonded by our shared trauma. Through her, I met other family members of Gabrielle's victims. We started a support group, then an advocacy organization to help protect elderly people from financial exploitation. We pushed for stronger laws, better oversight, more resources for victims. I found purpose in the pain, found strength I didn't know I had. Found out that at 68 years old, I wasn't done living. I was just getting started. One Sunday, about a year after Raymond's death, I stood up in church to give testimony. The same church where we'd gotten married, where I'd raised my children, where my community had held me up when I was drowning. I looked out at all those familiar faces, Patricia, Kenya, Tanya, Brandon, the quilting circle, Reverend Jackson, and I spoke from my heart. I thought my life was over when I found out the truth about Raymond, I said. I thought 43 years of marriage meant nothing if the man I loved was a lie, but I learned something. My life, my worth, my value. None of that was tied to Raymond or what he did. I was Dolores Williams before I became Dolores Washington, and I'm still Dolores, still standing, still strong. Raymond made his choices, and they destroyed him. But they don't have to destroy me. I looked at my grandchildren, sitting in the front pew. I'm building a different legacy now. One based on truth and justice and helping others. One my babies can be proud of. And that's worth more than any inheritance Raymond could have left them. The church said, Amen, and I felt something settle in my chest. Peace. Real, honest peace. I never remarried. Didn't want to. Didn't need to. I had my children, my grandchildren, my friends, my church, my purpose. I had my Tuesday quilting circle and my Thursday advocacy meetings and my Saturday mornings with the grandbabies. I had my life back, and it was fuller than it had ever been when I was living in Raymond's shadow. Sometimes, late at night, I still wondered who Raymond really was. Whether any of it had been real, or if I'd been just another mark from day one. But then, I'd remember my babies' faces, the life we'd built, the grandchildren who were my legacy regardless of what their grandfather had done. And I'd realize it didn't matter who Raymond was. What mattered was who I was, who I chose to be going forward, and I chose to be strong, to be free, to be me. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.